to build new trade relationships in order to move from reliance to resilience. Long benefited from our proximity to the world's largest and the world's most dynamic economy. But as the U.S. changes dramatically its policies, and that's the right of the United States, as it changes those policies, many of our former strengths have become our vulnerabilities. And our response begins by reimagining aspects of North American integration. Building strategic autonomy means more than defense and security. It means building new, reliable partners abroad, partnerships abroad. We've signed in the last year 20 new economic and security agreements across 5 continents. We're on track to conclude major trade agreements this year with India, with ASEAN, and Mercosur.
Back, President Trump just spoke to Fox News' John Roberts a moment ago. He says he is now considering renewing Project Freedom, but he says this time around, the U.S. guiding ships through the Strait of Hormuz would be just one small piece of what would be a larger military operation. When it comes to peace negotiations, the president tells Fox the regime is, quote, going to fold. Joining us now is senior correspondent Benjamin Hall. He's host of the new Fox Nation special, Hope Starts Here, Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Interestingly, Benjamin, the president also just told John that the U.S. would have to dig out what he calls the nuclear dust at its facilities because it's buried so deep that Iran wouldn't even be able to access it. So there's the answer to that question about whether it can remain or not. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting because what Iran has done, not only on this occasion, but going back over the years, is it likes to really drag out negotiations. And when it tells President Trump that to get the nuclear dust, you have to come into Iran, you've got to dig deep, I mean, that's bought them months and months before they can solve the nuclear issue. And so I think President Trump has been very clear that if the Iranians just keep finding ways to prolong and extend the negotiation, then that's not going to work either. Instead, what he said is that he's got all these options on the table. He's got the blockade, which is working. He's now got Project Freedom number 2, which he might start up. He's got military action. He even talked over the weekend potentially about the Space Force being involved in certain degrees. So, look, President Trump is saying very clearly, I've got all these options on the table. The one thing that is perhaps concerning the US and President Trump is the oil prices rising so high. Project Freedom deals with that. But he's not going to be rushed into making a deal that the Iranians are just dragging out. And so I think President Trump's been pretty clear ahead of his visit to China that he's got options on the table unless Iran comes back to them with a better deal. Remember, they called the deal over the weekend. He called it unacceptable. Then military action will start up again. The blockade will continue. Iran is going to continue to suffer. So I think we're going to have to see over the next few days in China how it plays out.
He, keeps pressuring the president in the media, asking him over and over, how long? What's the deadline? How much more time are you going to give them? And he really seems to be saying as much time as it takes for my objective.
People feeling a loss of control. It's a conversation that's been going on for a few years. Control or loss of control over their cost of living. Loss of control over who comes across their borders. Loss of control, as we've just heard, over what enters their social media feed. Control or loss thereof of a technology that may displace, destroy their jobs before it improves their lives. Control in a world that's more divided and dangerous by the day. And that loss of agency, control, is the common thread through all our politics. It doesn't respect ideology, it doesn't respect the old left-right map. And it has fed a politics of grievance, one that thrives on scarcity, feeds on division, and promises strength through demolition. And it won't be addressed by the old ways. And just as Marshall McLuhan, that's my necessary Canadian reference, Marshall McLuhan, described 60 years ago, our age of anxiety is caused by trying to do today's job with yesterday's tools and yesterday's concepts. And I thought that was one of President Obama's main points last evening, a fascinating conversation, point that we need new institutions as much as reimagining the old ones. And that was part of my argument at Davos, that the international rules-based order that we helped build together no longer works as it once claimed, that we cannot restore that which no longer holds, that nostalgia is not a strategy. We have to take the sign down and build anew. So with this context, what I want to do in my time is, actually, it'll extend beyond my time. Sorry, just kidding, don't worry. What I want to do is say a few words about what we're doing in Canada. And I'm not going to claim that we have all the answers, not least because we have a federal system and there are many fundamental roles of government, particularly in healthcare and education, for which we're not directly responsible. But even though, given that, and even though we're just getting started, I believe there are some of the broader lessons for all of us. So, and part of that, consistent with what I just said and said in Davos, is part of the way forward is to name plainly what's broken, to say as plainly as possible how we intend to replace it, and then do the hard work of building. And I'm going to provide a few examples. Housing is unaffordable in part because we haven't been building affordable housing. I mean, it's not a tautology. We literally have not been building in this country. As Mike Moffat knows, we haven't built affordable housing for about 30 years as a class. So what we're doing, and it's not all the answer, but it's part of the answer, is to look to build affordable housing on a scale and speed not seen in generations. And by the way, if you haven't been building affordable housing for 30 years, it's pretty easy to meet that bar. It's a low bar. We have a higher bar than that. But we've created a new public agency, Build Canada Homes, that targets deeply affordable housing. That means transition housing for homeless, all the way up the continuum to mixed income developments. Very importantly, a variety of levers for that, including taking the very large federal land bank and making it available. We're looking to double the pace of affordable housing construction using factory technologies familiar to many of you from Europe, using, of course, Canadian lumber and Canadian workers, cut building times in half, reduce costs, and reduce embedded and operating emissions each by 20%. We're also working with the provinces, because there's a housing crisis right now, and municipalities to cut what are called development charges. If you're Mike Moffat and you're on his Twitter feed, you'll know what this means, because he talks about it incessantly, quite rightly. Development charges, we're working with them to cut those in half and to cut taxes on new home purchases. So what does that mean? Translate that right here in Toronto, across Ontario, but here in Toronto, that is a savings now, as I speak today, on new homes of up to $200,000. That's affordability. Second example. The truth is that building energy systems that are cleaner, more abundant and affordable won't just happen. And in Canada, we need to remind ourselves of that, because we start from a very enviable position. We have the second lowest energy costs delivered on the retail side and for industrials in the OECD. More than 80% of the power generated in the country is zero emission. But like many others, we need to double the scale of that grid over the course of the next 2 decades. That will require massive investment, the linking of provincial systems, they're all islands. It'll require spreading the costs of that generation over time, using our AAA balance sheet so that ratepayers today, who are being crushed by affordability concerns, don't pay all the costs of those investments that will benefit all our citizens and all generations over time, and the planet, of course, over decades. This is one of the big reasons why we have to do permitting reform, regulatory reform in Canada. It is an essential reason, apart from fundamental reasons of justice, why we need new partnerships with Indigenous peoples. And we need a willingness, this can be sometimes hard to accept, we need a willingness to use all sources of energy, including some gas, and all technologies beyond conventional renewables, certainly to nuclear, hydro, small modular reactors, carbon capture, and geothermal. That combination will ensure reliability and affordability and dramatically slash emissions across the entire economy. That is the point. That is the objective. And I'll just put some numbers on this. You can't get away without some numbers from me, I'm sorry. Our current grid, all of that generation across the country, largely clean, emits just under 50 megatons a year. The emissions of heavy industry, transportation, buildings in Canada is about 525 megatons a year. The biggest prize is reducing emissions affordably through electrification rather than purity in generation. Third, we need to build new trade relationships in order to move from reliance to resilience. And it's truth that Canada has long benefited, and we are very grateful. We have long benefited, we did say thank you, long benefited from our proximity to the world's largest and the world's most dynamic economy. But as the U.S. changes dramatically its policies, and that's the right of the United States, as it changes those policies, many of our former strengths have become our vulnerabilities. We still, to be clear, we still have the best trade deal with the United States. Over 85% of our goods move tariff-free across the border. But with American tariffs, so-called 232 or strategic tariffs on autos, steel, aluminum, forest products, I could go on, but in these so-called strategic areas, those are creating deep challenges for our workers and firms in those industries, industries that until now had been highly, highly integrated with the United States to the benefit of America as well as Canada. And our response begins by reimagining aspects of North American integration. And to be absolutely clear, Canada, like Mexico, Canada remains open to deeper integration, including options for Fortress North America in selected sectors. And to be clear, those offers are on the table. But if that route is not ultimately possible, we will invest heavily in new markets and products. We'll reward those who build, buy, and produce in Canada, and we will build new partnerships abroad. We're already applying the main lessons of the past 18 months, that we must build our strategic autonomy. Now, that starts with meeting our NATO obligations. Meeting our NATO obligations, and it has to be said, for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are in the process, beyond that, moving forward, of catalyzing $500 billion of investment in defense and security and resilience over the next decade. But it means more than that. Building strategic autonomy means more than defense and security. It means building new, reliable partnerships abroad. We've signed in the last year 20 new economic and security agreements across 5 continents. We're on track to conclude major trade agreements this year with India, with ASEAN and Mercosur. And the early results of this strategy are encouraging. Non-U.S. exports are up sharply. We're on track to double them this decade. Foreign investment in Canada is at its highest in 2 decades, and it's running more than twice the rate, adjusted for the size of our economy, of all other G7 economies. And we're making this progress. We're making this progress because Canada is blessed with what the world wants, from energy to critical minerals, from aerospace to AI. We're making this progress because we have the values to which much of the world aspires, including commitments to sustainability, the rule of law, the belief that openness brings strength and mutual benefit. And we're making this progress in part because we've recognized, in some cases before others, the degree to which in the new world sovereignty requires more than a country just being able to feed, fuel, and defend itself, as important as that is. It requires access to those critical minerals, to space-based communications, to sovereign cloud, AI, payment systems, clean energy, and vaccines. And all of that demands partnership. And there's no one-stop shop for that partnership. We need a variable geometry, a dense web of partnerships across those core strategic capabilities and issues, drawing on common values and interests, because it's those common values and interests that will assure alignment and respect to those agreements. So from the coalition of the willing to support Ukraine, where we're one of the largest per capita contributors, to the G7's Buyers Club for critical minerals, and our AI partnership with India and Australia. For Canada, this also includes being the only non-European country to join SAFE, the European Union's Defence Procurement Initiative, and it includes intensifying defence, security, an economic partnership with the Nordic countries. Now, talking about building partnerships, building directly, but I want to focus on what is just as important as that physical build, which is how we build. How we build. We're focused on building sustainably because reducing emissions is not just a moral duty, it's an economic imperative. So that means those low-carbon homes, low-carbon trade corridors, low-carbon manufacturing, zero-carbon energy. We're building in solidarity with workers. Our focus is on creating good union careers for electricians, welders, carpenters, pipe fitters, the engineers who will build the homes, the ports, the energy systems of this country. 2 weeks ago, we just created something called Team Canada Strong. And it's a soup to nuts. It's not cradle to grave, but 15 to education to job, soup to nuts approach to train up to 100,000 new highly skilled tradespeople over the next 5 years, giving young Canadians a seamless pathway from first job to skills training, internships, qualifications, job placements in a country that will be building for decades. So this is a pathway to a career that we will pay for. We're building inclusively, in close partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. That means free, prior, and informed consent on major projects. It means financing Indigenous ownership